Before dawn in Germany, an American scout crawled toward a farm occupied by 40 to 50 enemy soldiers. Inside a nearby corral stood roughly 50 horses, the only fast transport the Germans had. The scout had asked his captain for 5 minutes before the attack began. He carried no saddle, only a short length of rope and an idea that sounded almost impossible. If he could reach the animals, mount one, and drive the herd beyond the hill, the Germans would wake to find their escape gone. The scout slipped past the guards, fashioned the rope into a crude bridle, and climbed onto the back of an enemy horse. Then, as daylight approached, he opened the corral and gave a Crow war cry. 50 horses surged into motion while German soldiers fired after them. The man leading that stampede was Joseph Medicine Crow. To the United States Army, he was an infantry scout completing a dangerous mission. To the Crow people, he was completing the final deed that could make him a war chief. The meaning of that moment had begun long before Joseph ever wore an American uniform. In Crow tradition, becoming a war chief was not a rank someone could claim or inherit. It had to be earned through 4 demanding acts in battle. A warrior had to touch a living enemy, take a weapon from an opponent, successfully lead a war party, and capture an enemy horse. These were not a checklist designed for 20th century warfare. They came from another age, when combat moved across the northern plains and horses determined whether a war party escaped or disappeared. Yet during the final campaigns of World War II, Joseph would find each ancient requirement waiting for him in a modern battlefield of rifles, mines, machine guns, and artillery. The 50 horses were the most striking part of his story, but they were not the whole story. Before he could drive that herd out of the German position, he had to survive 3 other moments in which courage alone was not enough. Joseph was born in October 1913 near Lodge Grass, Montana, on the Crow Reservation. His Crow name was High Bird. He grew up surrounded by people who treated history as something living, carried in memory, and spoken from one generation to the next. One of the most important voices belonged to White Man Runs Him, a Crow scout who had been present during the 1876 Battle of the Little Bighorn. Joseph was still a boy when White Man Runs Him died, but the stories remained with him. Another grandfather, Medicine Crow, had followed the warpath while still young and became known for capturing horses from an enemy camp. To outsiders, that act could be reduced to theft. Within Crow tradition, entering an enemy position, taking its most valuable means of movement, and returning safely was proof of nerve, judgment, and skill. Joseph inherited those stories, but he did not grow into a man trapped in the past. He became one of the most highly educated members of his generation. He studied sociology and psychology, then earned a master's degree in anthropology from the University of Southern California in 1939, becoming the first member of the Crow Nation to receive such a degree. He planned to continue his academic work and preserve the history of his people. Then the United States entered the war, and in 1943, Joseph joined the Army. His education could have opened a path toward a commission. According to his later oral history, he declined that opportunity and entered the service as an enlisted man. He carried Crow identity into the Army in quiet, personal ways. He painted 2 red stripes on his arms beneath the uniform and kept a yellow eagle feather under his helmet. The feather was not decoration for other soldiers to admire. It was a private connection to home and a symbol of protection. The Army issued him a rifle, a pack, and a number. The older traditions gave him another way to understand what courage required. Training took him through Texas and then toward the East Coast. From there, he crossed the Atlantic aboard a Liberty ship and entered the Mediterranean. His division landed at Marseille, where German radio broadcasts welcomed the newly arrived Americans with threats. Joseph served in Company K, 3rd Battalion, 411th Infantry Regiment, part of the 103rd Infantry Division, known as the Cactus Division. There were not enough vehicles to carry everyone forward, so the soldiers marched. On their first long movement inland, they covered about 25 miles through the night. They continued across France, then through Belgium, following a German army that was retreating but still dangerous. The landscape changed, the weather worsened, and each mile brought the division closer to the German border. Joseph was often used as a scout because he could move carefully, read terrain, and report what waited ahead. Those skills did not come from a romantic legend. They came from discipline, attention, and the ability to remain calm while other men were trying to kill him. At a creek along the German frontier, army photographers prepared to record a symbolic crossing. Germany lay on the opposite bank. Joseph was ordered forward and became known as the first American Indian soldier of the division to enter the country. The moment made a useful photograph, but the fighting beyond the creek was not symbolic. German defenses were still capable of surrounding units and cutting supply routes. During one engagement, Joseph's company pushed through the enemy line and then found itself nearly encircled, with ammunition running dangerously low. The commander believed Joseph had the best chance of getting through. He was ordered to lead a small group back across mined ground and under enemy fire, reach American positions, secure ammunition, and return. It was not a dramatic charge. It was a long, exposed test of navigation and control, where one poor step could kill the men behind him. Joseph brought the group through, fed them quickly, gathered the ammunition, and led them back to the trapped company. That mission satisfied more than an urgent military need. In Crow terms, Joseph had successfully led a war party, yet there was no ceremony in the field and no time to consider what it meant. Ammunition had arrived, men could keep fighting, and the company moved on. The next deed came at brutally close range. During fighting in a small German town, Joseph moved through an alley while an enemy soldier approached from the other side of an opening. The two men collided before either could create distance. Joseph swung his rifle and knocked the German's weapon from his hands. In seconds, a war fought with artillery and armies collapsed into a struggle between two human beings. The German was larger. Joseph dropped his own rifle, closed with him, and eventually gained control. He had now touched a living enemy and taken away his weapon, fulfilling two more requirements in the same violent encounter. But what happened next revealed something more important than the count. Joseph later remembered tightening his hands around the German's throat and preparing to kill him. Then the man cried out for his mother. The word crossed every difference between them. Joseph released him. In the official language of battle, the enemy had been disarmed and defeated. In Joseph's memory, he had also faced the point where victory could become unnecessary killing. The decision did not make him less dangerous, and it did not erase the men already lost. It showed that his idea of courage included restraint. By this stage of the campaign, 3 of the old deeds had taken shape inside a war of steel. He had led men through danger, touched an enemy in combat, and taken a weapon away. Only the horse remained, the requirement that seemed least likely to appear in a mechanized war. Tanks, trucks, and armored vehicles had transformed the battlefield. Yet the collapsing German army still depended on horses for transport. And one evening, Joseph saw a mounted group moving along a road ahead of his company. He followed at a distance as the riders approached a farm. There were roughly 40 to 50 German soldiers and about 50 horses. The men dismounted, placed the animals inside a corral, and entered the farm buildings for the night. Joseph returned with the information. The Americans surrounded the position and planned to attack at first light, when the Germans would still be gathered and visibility would begin to improve. From a conventional military view, the horses were simply enemy transport. If the Germans reached them, they could scatter, carry messages, or escape the closing ring. To Joseph, they were also the last war deed his grandfathers had described when he was a boy. He did not abandon the army's plan to chase a private legend. He offered a practical solution that served both purposes. Give him a few minutes before the assault, he told the captain, and he would remove the horses before the Germans could use them. The request placed the captain in an unusual position. Sending a soldier into the corral risked alerting the entire farm before the attack began. Refusing meant leaving the enemy's transport untouched. Joseph had already earned the trust of the officers around him, and the captain approved the plan, assigning another soldier to help. The 2 men would enter before dawn, when the buildings were still dark but the horses could be moved. Joseph had no proper riding equipment. He would have to improvise a bridle, mount an unfamiliar animal, control a nervous herd, and cross open ground before the Germans understood what was happening. If you believe decisions like this deserve to be remembered, subscribe to Frontline Brief, like this documentary, and tell us in the comments whether you would have given Joseph those 5 minutes. For the men waiting outside the farm, the answer was no longer theoretical. The darkness was thinning, the attack clock was moving, and Joseph had begun crawling toward the corral. He and his assistant reached the enclosure without raising the alarm. The horses shifted in the dim light, close enough together that a sudden noise could turn the entire group into confusion. Joseph used his rope to form a simple double half-hitch, creating the kind of improvised bridle that could guide one animal without a bit or saddle. He climbed onto the horse while his assistant prepared to open the gate. Nothing about the scene resembled the mounted warfare of his grandfathers. He wore an American helmet, carried modern equipment, and waited beside a farm occupied by German soldiers. But the central problem was unchanged. He had entered an enemy position, taken control of its horses, and now had to escape before the enemy stopped him. Once the gate opened, hesitation would be more dangerous than speed. Joseph drove the first horse forward, the others followed, and the quiet corral erupted into pounding hooves. Then he released the Crow war cry he had carried across an ocean. The sound announced both success and danger. Horses poured through the opening and gathered behind the animal Joseph rode. The Germans woke to the noise, rushed from the buildings, and began firing. Joseph kept the herd moving toward the hill while his assistant escaped with him. Dust, shouting, gunfire, and the rhythm of 50 animals replaced the silence of the farm. The Germans had expected an American infantry attack. They had not expected their own horses to vanish before it began. By the time they could organize, the herd was already beyond their immediate reach. Joseph drove the animals over the rise and out of sight, leaving the mounted unit without its transport. The American assault then struck the isolated position. Horse mission had not been a colorful interruption to the battle. It had removed the enemy's fastest exit and helped close the trap. Joseph had turned an ancient measure of courage into a practical act of modern warfare. When the firing ended, the 4 deeds existed as more than childhood instruction. He had led soldiers through enemy lines and returned with ammunition. He had touched an enemy in direct combat. He had knocked a weapon from that man's hands. And before dawn, under fire, he had entered an enemy position and taken not one horse but an entire herd. Joseph did not declare himself a chief on the battlefield. Crow recognition did not work that way. The deeds had to be recounted at home and judged by the elders who understood their meaning. For the moment, he was still an American soldier moving with the 103rd Division through Germany. The campaign continued toward Bavaria. Company K advanced with the Cactus Division into the final collapse of the Third Reich, eventually reaching the region around Berchtesgaden and linking with other Allied forces near the Brenner Pass. Each new mile carried Joseph farther from the Montana Reservation and deeper into the consequences of the war. Those consequences were not limited to combat. During the advance and occupation, Joseph encountered evidence of the concentration camp system. He later described compounds where the smell, the gas chambers, and the rows of bodies were almost impossible to comprehend. The experience placed his battlefield deeds inside a much darker reality. He had gone to war partly carrying the memory of Crow warriors and the hope of honoring his grandfathers. In Europe, he saw what happened when a state decided entire peoples had no right to exist. The contradiction was impossible to miss for a Native American who knew the history of reservations and dispossession in his own country. Yet Joseph did not use that history to excuse the Nazi system or reduce one suffering to another. He recognized the humanity of victims, the danger of racial hatred, and the cost paid by ordinary soldiers and civilians. The war that allowed him to complete the old deeds also convinced him that glory could never describe the whole experience. When Germany surrendered, Joseph remained for a time with occupation forces. The war had carried him from Montana to France, Belgium, Germany, Bavaria, and beyond. He had crossed borders on foot, moved through minefields, fought at arm's length, and ridden an enemy horse out of a corral while gunfire followed him. Yet the decisive judgment waited at home. After returning to the Crow Nation, he recounted his wartime actions before tribal elders. They examined the deeds according to tradition, not according to army paperwork. The ammunition mission counted as leading a successful war party. The close fight counted as touching an enemy and taking his weapon. The German herd counted as capturing an enemy horse on a scale few could have imagined. The elders accepted the account and recognized Joseph Medicine Crow as a Crow war chief. In time, he became known as the last living Plains Indian war chief to have earned that status through traditional war deeds. The title did not replace his American military record. He received the Bronze Star, and France honored him with the Legion of Honor. But the two systems of recognition measured different things. The Army rewarded service performed within a modern division. The Crow designation connected Joseph to a much older line of responsibility. A war chief was not simply the man who fought most aggressively. He was expected to remember, to teach, and to carry the experience of one generation into the next. Joseph was unusually prepared for that work. Before the war, he had trained as an anthropologist. After it, he served as a Crow tribal historian and wrote books and scholarly works that preserved oral tradition, tribal history, and the memories of people whose voices were often reduced or ignored in national accounts. The soldier who had taken 50 horses did not spend the rest of his life chasing the excitement of that morning. He devoted it to keeping history from disappearing. He also preserved a direct family connection to the Battle of the Little Bighorn through the stories of White Man Runs Him. That link made Joseph more than a participant in two separate chapters of American history. He became a bridge between them. As a child, he listened to a man who had scouted during the wars of the 19th century. As an adult, he crossed Europe in the largest war of the 20th. Later, students, historians, filmmakers, presidents, and veterans listened to him explain both worlds. His humor remained visible when he described the German horses. He understood that one audience might call him a horse thief, while the Crow people saw a great war deed. He could laugh at that difference without surrendering its meaning. The story worked because it was practical, improbable, and deeply personal at the same time. It showed how one man carried his culture into uniform without allowing the uniform to erase who he was. In 2009, President Barack Obama awarded Joseph the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the highest civilian honor in the United States. By then, the young scout had become an elderly historian whose life connected tribal memory, academic work, military service, and national recognition. The ceremony honored far more than the morning he took the horses, but that moment remained the clearest image of his courage. He had entered an enemy position without a saddle, turned a rope into a bridle, and removed the transport of an entire mounted group. He had also spared a defeated soldier after hearing him call for his mother. Those two acts belonged together. One showed bold action under fire. The other showed control at the moment when killing was easiest to justify. Joseph's record was not powerful because every choice fit a simple heroic pattern. It was powerful because strength, tradition, intelligence, and mercy appeared in the same life. Joseph Medicine Crow died in April 2016 at the age of 102. The White House remembered him with the Crow word Bakach, meaning a good man. By then, almost every living connection to the battlefield generation of World War II was fading. Joseph's story endured because he spent decades making sure memory did not end with the people who carried it. He taught that history was not a collection of distant dates. It was an obligation between generations. The stories told to him as a boy shaped the choices he made in Germany. The choices he made in Germany became stories he returned to his people. The elders then gave those actions meaning, and Joseph spent the rest of his life explaining that meaning to others. The 50 horses are unforgettable, but the deeper achievement was the chain of memory that brought them into the present. Near the end of his life, Joseph rejected the easy claim that war produces true winners. He had seen victory from the inside, and he knew what it left behind. Both sides lose, he argued, because the dead do not return and the survivors carry what they witnessed. That belief did not diminish the courage required at the German farm. It made the courage more honest. Joseph Medicine Crow did not ride into legend because war was glorious. He acted because his company needed the enemy's transport removed, because his captain trusted him, and because an old responsibility had followed him from Montana to Europe. Before sunrise, he asked for 5 minutes. He entered the corral as an American scout, drove 50 German horses over a hill, and returned home as the man his elders could recognize as a war chief. The deed lasted only minutes. The memory has survived for generations.